I'm going to start with, thanks James, thanks for having me back. I love this series. And I'm going to start with dogs. I'm going to read two very brief pieces from this new book, and I won't say anything else. They are Jewish hunters in northern Illinois, and the birds come out and party. I should tell you the title. The title is called The Hunters. That would make now sense. It might make more sense. They're Jewish hunters in northern Illinois, and the birds come out and party. Their father had given the boys a choice: spend Sunday at Sunday school at their Reform Temple, Lakeside Synagogue, learning Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic, and Cherokee, and periodically even Jewish precepts, or head up to the North Country, Wisconsin, to become a man. The four of them, a platoon of meandering unkillers, marching, silently marching. The land never rose in their eyes, but to call the prairie flat isn't to know it with your feet. To your feet, the November fields are fathomless. The more you walk, the more you never get anywhere. And Alex Popper liked to put his fingers in the little bullet holders of his hunting coat and walk with his eyes closed. But those hunt club fields were so stocked with game that even hunting with a Lhasa Apso, they couldn't have wits in action. Sir Edmund, in spite of his pampered backyard suburban life, turned out to be pretty good at flushing birds. Pheasants aren't very hard to shoot. First, there's that hysterical nut house cackling, and then the running start, followed by a slow rise like a fat, wide-bodied plane taking off. Occasionally, all their volleys of shots, somebody would hit a bird. Sir Edmund would treat the body, and it was Popper's job to ferry the deceased, and he liked that part. He was a backward kangaroo, the pheasant against his back, warm, bleeding, heavy, with the putty-like inertness of the newly murdered. Every third field or so there was a rack and a row of nails. Birds would be hanging there like spent rags, their eyes pried open. So we would have to give up the body and squeeze another neck between the nails. And Philip, his father, would say with near reverence, "These birds were raised to be killed, so we're only doing our part, playing our role in nature's great cycle of life and death and food on the table. Besides, if we didn't shoot them, the next barbarian would, and then what?" That's just some dogs. My father, in real life, he insisted that our dogs be buried in the backyard. And so Gretchen, Taddy, Louie, Hillary, and Pepe all died between November and February. So the ground in Illinois is, it's really, we were always begging them to live longer. Anyway. This is the beginning of this new book, and it's called Visit to the Judge. And we're in Chicago in 1984. And I guess this is my God contribution. This is how it was for certain boys in Chicago, the sons of lawyers. In some families, forget about the bar mitzvah. To leave boyhood behind, you went to see Judge Abraham Lincoln Marovitz for a chat. He was a great man, a learned man, bosom buddy of Mayor Daley himself, the machine's favorite judge. In the words of one West Side precinct captain, the Yid really classes up the joint. The federal judge, think, son, of the heights to which you yourself might one day rise. In the index of Mike Royko's book, Boss, which is the greatest political book ever written, maybe it's the greatest book ever written, the judge is listed like this: Marovitz, Abraham Lincoln, pages 41 to 46. Amateur boxing career, page 41. Association with underworld figures, page 42 to 43. Influenced by, quote, friendships, page 43 to 44. Friendship with Mayor Daley, 44 to 45. And preoccupation with Abe Lincoln, 41 to 42. Now, to this day, Popper has no truck with Royko's insinuations, and he remains a loyal, if wayward, stalwart. And hey, if Judge Marovitz was crooked, he wasn't that crooked, which in Chicago, as everywhere, if everywhere was as honest about being dishonest, means something. It wasn't a chat. And Popper remembers how he sat there, swallowed up in that tremendous leather chair, afraid to even move because how loud the crinkle would sound in his ears, and how he listened. But take a step back. Before he listened, Popper waited. And in that waiting was a silence so absolute, it was like drowning in Lake Michigan. Him in there alone, his father in the judge's anteroom pacing.
and that judge staring at him. His thick, single eyebrow was like a centipede crawling across the top of his face, and his eyes beneath that thicket of brow were full of motion, and to meet them straight on, as his father had told him to do, caused a churn in Popper's stomach. And above him, as if to enforce the power of the judge's gaze 100-fold, was an armada of images of Abraham Lincoln. Paintings, photographs, etchings, silhouettes, drawings. And on the table, busts of Lincoln, statuettes of Lincoln. And they were all watching him too. And this was a test. And the silence was broken only by the judge's sporadic wheezing. The 14th floor of the Klaczynski Federal Building, after hours, February. The judge slowly raised one hand and waved it around a little, as if to summon the force of all the presidents, who were all the same president. And then, with the finger of his other hand, he pointed to a framed picture on his desk of a man and a woman dressed in black. They had lined faces, hollow-eyed peasants from Lithuania, his parents. And the judge played traffic cop, exhorting Popper to look around the room and at the same time at the little picture. But he got it. He'd been prepared by his father to get it. The judge spoke. From a Kentucky log cabin to the White House. From the shtetl to the U.S. courthouse. Look at him, look at them, now look at me. My father was a peddler. My mother sewed buttons for the landowner's wife. My mother first got wind of the great emancipator at a meeting of socialists in Podebreca. She heard that after he freed the slaves, Lincoln got shot in the temple. In the head, mother. It means in the head. Nothing would convince my mother that Lincoln wasn't a Jew. And the two of them, Popper and the judge, laughed. But the judge stopped laughing earlier, so Popper's laugh hung there alone between them like an insult. And the judge's ruddy face drooped then, became sad. Sad because there was some boy, and there were always some boys, who failed to embrace the opportunity that was being handed to them on the silverest of all platters. Maybe you yourself are one of those boys who will squander God's gift of Chicago. One of those boys who will take this gift for granted. And the judge was talking less to him now, and almost to an audience of ghosts who seemed to be gathered at the darkening windows, just behind the half-closed blinds. Here we're free to live. No Ivan the Terribles, no Cossacks, no Hitlers, no Stalins. In this city they wouldn't know a pogrom from the St. Patrick's Day parade. And here we answer only to the United States Constitution and Robert's Rules of Order. With, note, one unwritten stipulation. Some call it patronage, I call it friendship. Everybody needs somebody else. Just as in the old country, everybody serves Caesar. The difference here is you get a shot at playing Caesar in the movie, and so does your neighbor, and your neighbor's cousin Babczynski. We scratch each other's backs in this city. I scratch you, you scratch me. Nice to have your back scratched, especially those places you can't reach. This is how we build our buildings tallest to the tall, our highways 14 lanes across. You want a Picasso? We got a Picasso, a real big Picasso. The judge sneezed then, an eternal, handless sneeze, the sneeze of a man for whom sneezes were not an obstacle to straight dope. His little body jolted. And it wasn't absurd. If it sounds absurd, it's memory's fault and not the judge's. Because the truth is, it was a show. A show Popper studied for, a show he rehearsed for, but there was something fundamental about it that wasn't a show at all. Himself in the big leather chair with his cold feet, and it was less the judge's words or all those sorrowful Lincolns than the incoming dusk of the city, the gray, doomful light settling over that room through the half-closed blinds. Because he was being told in no uncertain terms, don't be cute, your flesh will wither too. Don't be cowed into the old hoodwink that you are actually young, that you've got your whole life ahead of you. Even cows aren't so stupid. And the old man gulped a breath and laughed, really laughed this time, a terrible, high-pitched, whinny of a laugh. But it was all right, because his father had said, make it past the laugh. All you got to do is make it past the laugh and you're home free. And then the judge reached to his shelf and pulled down the Bible and began leafing, seemingly at random, until he came to his favorite book, Numbers. And then he intoned, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt. The judge snapped the book shut, leaned toward him over the great desk, and began the test. How did Moses respond to this cowardice and ingratitude? First, Popper said, he put his hand in the sand, Your Honor. And then, he pleaded with the people, Your Honor. And then, the people still wouldn't listen, Your Honor. Yes, and then what happened? Well, the Jews prepared to stone Moses and Aaron, Your Honor. Conclusion? Except to be stoned, Your Honor. Except to be stoned for what? The greater glory, Your Honor. Right, true, well done, right. And then? Well, God had enough of the Jews then. They were too rebellious, too defiant. He wanted to smite them out of existence, but Moses convinced him to give them another chance, and God agreed reluctantly. And so after a couple of minor plagues for punishment, fire and snakes, and also a few men over 20 sucked into a crack in the earth, they moved on again. Moses wanted to get to the promised land already, Your Honor, because 40 years of wandering in the wilderness gets tiring. Sustained. And did Moses reach the promised land, Mr. Popper? Popper hesitated, purposefully. He weighed his answer with a heavy burden of study, of knowledge, of the sad irony of the whole thing. No, Your Honor, he never did. In the end, Moses too failed God, and yes, and God brought him to Mount Nebo and let him have a look at the land of milk and honey, but Moses never set foot in it. And in summation, the judge said, Moses died alone, no family, no friends. An angry God isn't much of a friend, Your Honor. The judge began to clap, the doll-like hands in slow syncopation. Clap, clap, clap. The room all shadows now. God? You want God? God's through with us. Forget Moses. Goodbye, Abe. Your days are done. You were good stories, good men. But this, my son, is Chicago, and we don't go it alone. For a while longer, they sat together in the new darkness until it was time for the judge to ring the little bell. Tinkle, tinkle. And then at last the secretary came in, the light draining into the room as if from another world. And she took Popper by the wrist. And all these years later, he still thinks of her moist grip. And she towed him out to where his proud father waited with his hat in his hands.